Howdy! Editing Taro here, and I know that a lot of people on the internet don't really watch deck profiles fully because I am a people on the internet and I don't always watch deck profiles fully. So for all the wonderful people like you that don't really want to bother with my 20-minute rant about how amazing V Premium Dark Irregular is, the deck log is going to be in the description, and I'm going to put the code on the screen so you can check it out. And if you like it, you can leave the video a like and share it around and show all your DI friends all the funny new DI spice that I've been trying out. You can also subscribe to the channel. I'm going to be doing a lot more DI stuff. And I don't know, maybe check me out on Twitter. I also tweet about DI on occasion. So yeah, hope you're going to have fun. Enjoy! Howdy, people of the internet! My name is Taro, and I am a lime boy that does card game stuff. And today, I am here to do card game stuff. And as you can tell by the wonderful Matt over here, I recently came back from Springfest Toronto with my team. We had a lot of fun. It was a great event. Got to meet some great players. Got to play some great games. We stayed there for 2 days. On the first day, we played in the premium event because we were all a lot more fond of premium than overdress. One of my teammates did not have an overdress deck. And overall, we didn't really feel like playing Ava, Youth, and Overlord Mirrors for most of the day. So we decided, yeah, premium might be a lot more fun. And that day went pretty horribly for me, I'm not gonna lie. I played No Life King, and I was just not there. On the second day, however, we played in the V event, and that one went completely differently. One of the things we actually did before the event itself is the night of, we tested with all of the V players that were going to participate in the event in my friend group. We had a bunch of people, a lot of them were playing good decks. I was bringing Dark Irregulars again, and Dark Irregulars is kind of a meme. I mean, it's strong, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't have the oomph you have like in decks like in like Lords, Steam Maidens, you know? It's not a big meta threat. But through testing and through clever deck building decisions, I think we managed to find one of the most optimal, quote-unquote optimal, and at the very least, one of the most fun ways of playing V Premium Dark Irregulars currently. I haven't seen anything in that build implemented before in any topping lists, so I thought I might as well share because it's pretty interesting and it works kind of well, and the logic is surprisingly solid. It just works. Obviously, when you're playing V Premium Dark Irregulars, you are most likely gonna be playing SCHARHROT. SCHARHROT Vampire is kind of the main grade 3 we have. It's probably the strongest one. If you don't know what the main combo is with this deck, let me just explain what the basic philosophy is. SCHARHROT is a Mordred clone, so when he swings, he's gonna be able to restand 2 of your rear guards. If you have 13 cards in Soul, you combine this with a card called Number of Terror, and you usually want to have 1 SCHARHROT and 2 Numbers of Terror. When Number of Terror attacks, he will put one of your rear guards into the soul to draw 2 cards. So you do this combo with swinging 1 Number of Terror, 2 Number of Terror, swing with SCHARHROT, activate SCHARHROT's skill, restand the Number of Terror, swing with them again, and in total you've drawn +2 because of this Number of Terror, +2 because of this Number of Terror, +2 because of your Twin Drive, +2 because of this one, +2 because of this one. You've drawn 10 cards. Overall, this is one of the biggest tempo swings you can get in Dark Irregulars right now. It's your winning combo, and it just works well. Oh, and don't forget that this guy inherently will get power, and this guy will give you power, so it's just big numbers, and it swings hard. Ever since the release of Clan Collection, there have been 2 general philosophies for building SCHARHROT. One of the philosophies is I don't do anything early game because my deck is too CB reliant, but once I get Counterblast, oh boy, does my deck pop off philosophy, which is played by a lot of people that play Dark Irregulars. So it involves running cards like Poisonic Abductor that can search pretty much anything in your deck for 1 Counterblast. Then you need to run cards like Emblem Master, Demonted Executioner that are big soul charged 3 cards, and you slowly build towards your 20 soul condition to activate Hope on Dump, and if you're kind of a mad lad, maybe even Gusty. So that is one philosophy. My philosophy, on the other hand, is that I know most good players are aware of the fact that Dark Irregulars usually does nothing when they have no Counterblast. So all of my deck is Counterblast free, except for one spicy tech that I will show you at the very end that kind of makes this whole deck function. How about starting with the grade 0s? We have 1V starter. I'm playing Gatekeeper because it's the only DI starter that wasn't in any of my other DI decks. We're going to be playing a bunch of crits. 8 crits of the normal variety to be exact, because crits win games, and they have 15k shield, and they're cool, and I like them. In terms of the perfect guards, we are running 3 crit sentinels because they are just huge shields and extra criticals that will let you steal games early. It's especially fun in Dark Irregulars again because you have restanding rear guards, you have big rear guards also, so it's really cool having crits. And I'm running one of the drop PG. Why am I running the drop PG? Because you kind of need perfect guards. Just being a protect deck is usually not enough. We are in a force meta, and we're in a force meta with decks that multi-attack. So we're going to be having to deal with huge swings, and often even the 30k will not be enough past the first turn. So at first this is fine, then you really want to get into this. Also, just checking this as a damage trigger can be really good, and also having only one draw trigger makes it really easy to keep count of the number of cards in your deck in the late game, to know how many cards you can afford to draw, how many cards you can afford to soul charge, stuff like that. So I really like this ratio. You could mess around with it. A lot of people run 2-2. 2-2 is not bad. I like 2-2. I was just banking more on the aggressive side, especially because it was a team event and I could afford to be a bit more risky with my deck building. Lastly, for heal guardians. Yes, I'm not running the 20k heal because you kind of need the protection in the early game. You don't mind using these in the early game because, again, our deck doesn't counterblast. Sometimes you will also need to call this down to get the one counterblast if you can only ride in the SCHARHROT and you want to get the restand off. And the biggest perk these have over the other triggers is that the biggest hurdle you can have playing Dark Irregulars right now is if you draw all triggers. Cool thing with this, it actually has 10,000 power. So you can also just call this down, and with SCHARHROT skill, that we will go into later, it will basically be able to hit numbers. You will actually be able to attack if needed. If not, just call another trigger and you're fine. Also, being a grade 3 is pretty cool because sometimes you will have to ride this to damage your opponent. So being able to ride the Heal Guardian is also an extra perk of the Heal Guardian. Now that we're done with the triggers, let's get to the other, the second most boring part of the deck. Let's go. We're going to be doing the grade 3s. We're going to be playing 4 copies of SCHARHROT Vampire. So how SCHARHROT Vampire works. At the beginning of the battle phase, your front row will get 1000 power for every card in your soul. So it's just free power. That's nice. It's fun. It works really, really well. The second skill, as I mentioned, is a Mordred clone. When he attacks, you can counterblast one, stand a rearguard, and if you have 13 cards in soul or more, you can stand another rearguard. So it just stands your front row, gives it power. This is pretty much your main Vanguard. You always want to end your game on this guy, you want to ride this guy, have a bunch of attacks, and be able to force cards out of your opponent's hand and trigger all of our cards that have cool on-attack effects multiple times because you restand them. Awesome card. It's a VR. You want 4. I'm sorry, this is kind of expensive, but you kind of need this card. Then, I am running 2 copies of Demon World Marquis Ammon as the backup grade 3 / potential side rearguard. So this card is important for 2 reasons. First, his first skill. It reads, put a card from each your rearguard, your hand, and your drop zone into the soul, and your opponent does the same but twice. And if they failed to complete the full skill by putting 2 cards from hand, 2 cards from field, and 2 cards from drop, he will get an extra drive check. So it's cool. The most fun part with this is that your opponent will basically be minusing 4, and you will get maybe a drive check if they don't have a card in drop zone. So having them remove cards from drop zone is usually not that relevant. You mostly care about hand and field. Field, again, for most decks right now is not an issue, but the 2 hand rip can be really, really good. And also, sometimes this is a good skill to activate if you want to damage deny your opponent. So if you don't want to swing with your Vanguard, but you have some rear guards, and you want to activate their on-attack skills, but you still want to get something out of your Vanguard, you can just ride this guy, activate the skill, send all the cards in the soul, hand rip 2, retire 2 cards on field, and then you can proceed with the rest of your turn. You can end your turn also if you want. It's not necessarily the best play, but sometimes it's relevant. Second reason is because it just gets huge. Second skill says, during your turn, this unit gets plus 5k for every 6 cards in your soul, and make that 10k if he's on Vanguard. So he's just super, super big. And late game, when you're going to be in the 20s, even on rearguard, he's going to have plus 15, 20k. He's also important because he has an Ammon name, and that is relevant because a lot of our cards are Ammons, and one of our cards is a card that buffs our Ammons. So we want to have as many Ammons as possible. I considered running 3 of him. I like him at 2. You can run him at 3. Then we are running 1 copy of Hope on Dump. This is the win con. This is the main guard restrict. You just call this down. When you're at 20 soul, Until the end of turn, when your opponent would guard, they need to guard in increments of 20k shield. So they can't just call down the Perfect Guard and be like, Lamau, Perfect Guard your attack. No, 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 no. They need to call in increments of 20, 40, or 60 or more, you know? So if they want to use that Perfect Guard, it's going to be the Perfect Guard plus 20k shield total. That's a really nice way of forcing extra cards out of your opponent's hand, and sometimes your numbers will just be so awkward they will physically be unable to guard them in increments of 20k. The only reason I'm running it at 1 is because sometimes it can be kind of a brick early game, and I just don't like seeing it. Also, this deck is pretty good at going through itself without losing too many cards to random soul charges. So often you will end up drawing into this guy unless you soul charge him early game by accident. And the other thing is that nowadays you don't really need to be playing multiple copies of Hope on Dom to have your opponent play around Hope on Dom. This has kind of become the central piece, the main identity of V Premium Dark Irregulars. Your opponent will know that this is your win con, and often they will play expecting the Hope on Dump, leading them to play suboptimally in certain circumstances. Sometimes they will do their best to deny you like your 20th soul charge because they fear the Hope on Dump, stuff like that. Often, you don't even need to slam this guy on board for him to have an impact. Just your opponent knowing that you run Hope on Dump is fine, so even if you soul charge him, they might be fearing a second one. Next card. We're running Number of Terror. As I mentioned, this is one of the main combo pieces. I only run him at 3 because I don't want to have too many grade 3s, and also he needs a specific soul threshold to get started. Also, it's one of the cards I don't really want to ride. Sometimes you kind of want to ride it to damage deny. Sometimes you rather ride the Heal Guardian because it swings under Excel and Protect numbers. You know, it's kind of difficult. I'm comfortable with 3. Often I draw him, and also we got another card that fulfills a really similar purpose. Just a recap on his skills real quick. When he is placed, if you have 10 cards in Soul, he gets 10,000 power and 10,000 shield. So he can also be shield if you keep him in hand. Once you're at 10 Soul, you can just guard with this guy. This is one of the big perks of this deck. You have a bunch of random shield that just comes from nowhere, either from you having soul, your opponent having soul, so you'll never be in need of guarding power. You're most of the time going to be fine. You're going to be able to tank most of your opponent's swings. If you can't tank them, you can just guard them. Second skill, when it attacks a Vanguard, you can put one of your Vanguards into the soul, draw 2 cards. So at first, the skill is a break even because you're going to be calling this guy and the rear guard, send it to soul to draw 2. I guess it's a +1 because he stays on board in a sense. But after that, it's going to become so much better. A cool trick you can do if you want to damage deny your opponent on Luard. For example, you don't want to give him the damage, but you still want to get that really cool draw 2 skill. Call this down before you're at 10 soul. So stay at 9, call this. Use your skills to soul charge. He's going to be at 12. Swing under, soul charge your rear guard, draw 2 cards. It's a thing that comes up, and it's a thing that lets you stall out those games. So it's really good. This card can draw cards. It's pretty important. It's a big beater. Run it at as many copies as you want. I run 3. You could run 4. You can change up the ratios if you want. You can run like 3 SCHARHROT, 2 Ammon, 2 Hope on Dump. The grade 3 ratios are really flexible. Just play whatever you want. They're kind of open. It's the rest of the deck that I consider to be a bit more fixed, you know, and a bit more solved, quote unquote solved. That's the grade 3 lineup done. Then, another really important card that fulfills a kind of similar purpose to Number of Terror. It's Covetous Succubus. It's a new promo we got, and she is amazing. Kind of sad we didn't get a new art for her. I kind of like the old one, but I would have preferred a new art because it's kind of tedious having 2 cards with the same artwork. How she works is that when you have 6 cards in Soul, she gets plus 5k shield. If you have 10 cards in Soul, she gets an extra 5k shield. So she's going to be a 15k shield on her own. It's amazing. As I mentioned, a bunch of free shield. And her rearguard skill is even cooler than that, because when she attacks, her skill is kind of similar to Number of Terror. When she swings, if you are at 6 cards in Soul, so you need to be at 6 for the skill to proc, choose a rearguard, send it to Soul, countercharge 1, and then if you're at 10 cards in Soul or more, you get to draw 2, choose a card from hand, and send it to Soul. Yeah, it's me again. So, my dumbass kind of forgot to mention that this thing is once per turn. It's something I actually forgot and only relearned the night before the tourney, so keep that in mind. You can't use the skill twice if you restand it with SCHARHROT. You can only use it once per turn. In a sense, this skill is better than Number of Terror because it can countercharge. In a sense, it's worse than Number of Terror because you are not plussing 2, you're drawing 2 and sending 1 to Soul, so you're like plussing 1, and 1 is a filter. It's kind of the biggest thing that makes this not better than Number of Terror in most circumstances is that late game, she is not able to hit numbers on her own. Number of Terror gets plus 10,000 power when placed always because of his skill, so he's always going to be like a 20 plus beater, so he can hit pretty much any Vanguard. This is 9k, so you need to call a booster behind it, so it's always more hands to commit, but you know, it's not that big a deal. Sometimes you do want to damage deny, and the fact that she lets you draw 2 cards and send a card from hand to soul is a nice way of setting up your soul for number of terror, actually. So once you're at 6, pretty much the deck starts running, because you can start soul charging your rear guards. Once you're at 10, you're kind of goated. You will always have pretty much a way of soul charging guaranteed from one of your swings, from one of your rear guards, from one of your abilities. It's going to be amazing. It just works, and the filtering is nice, the counter charge is nice, love it. The next cards are going to be the Ammon Engine. So we're going to be running 4 copies of Ammon follower Ron Jinlin. Ron Jinlin, when placed on Vanguard or Rearguard, lets you soul charge 1, then your opponent can either let you soul charge 1 more card, or they can choose a Rearguard or a card from hand and send it to the soul. This is kind of what I meant when I say that you don't really need to have Hope on Dump for your opponent to play around Hope on Dump. When you're at 19 soul, and when you're at 18 soul, you call this down, you go to 19, most of the time your opponent will lose a hand card or a rear guard just to deny you the second soul charge. This is amazing. In certain circumstances, it's a retire. It's also nice for its second skill. If your opponent has 6 cards in soul or more, he gets plus 10,000 power and 10,000 shield. So he's cool because he soul charges on place, he doesn't cost a counterblast, he can be a minus for your opponent if they don't really care about losing a rear guard. If not, it's a soul charge too. It can also get power and free shield, because you never say no to free shield. It's great, and it has Ammon in the name. After that, we're gonna run 4 copies of Fu Jinlin, the little brother of the guy that came before. He is probably one of the most fan-favored DI cards currently in V Premium. How he works is that when he is on Vanguard or Rearguard, once per turn, you can choose a card from hand, send it to soul, draw a card, and your opponent can do the same. So you can filter a card, your opponent can filter a card. It's not really a plus, but it's good for hand fixing. Then, he has another skill when he is on Rearguard Circle, if your opponent has 6 cards in their soul, so usually after you use Ammon skill, or if they're playing a deck that soul charges like crazy like Genesis, you can soul charge 1, choose one of your Rearguards, they're going to get plus 5k. This is kind of good with SCHARHROT skill because it triggers at the same time, so you can activate this before resolving SCHARHROT, because in Vanguard you can resolve your auto abilities that trigger simultaneously in the order you want. So you're going to get plus 1 extra k with SCHARHROT skill, and you're going to have a 5k on one of your front row Rearguards with this guy's skill. It's going to be even bigger numbers. It's really, really cool, and he's good for, again, hand fixing, and he doesn't cost a counterblast, and Ammon in the name. Why is the Ammon name that relevant? Because I keep bringing it up for some reason. It's because of this guy, Ammon's follower Atrocious Blow, and this is probably one of my favorite cards right now to play in this deck ever. It's just so good. How it works: when he's placed on Vanguard Circle, look at 7 cards on the top of your deck. You get to choose a card, grade 3 with Ammon, and add it to your hand. So if you don't have a grade 3, you can search for one of your 2 Ammons. Often you will whiff it. That's why I don't really like writing him, but I often like to not write him even if I have the possibility to do so, because he's really good on Rearguard. On Rearguard, what he does is that you can rest him, then you can soul charge 1, choose one of your units with Ammon, and it gets plus 1000 power for every card in your soul. So it's basically a second SCHARHROT skill. In the late game, this is amazing because any Rearguard, as long as they have Ammon in the name, can turn into like a 50k beater for absolutely no reason and absolutely free, because you're going to have your plus 20k because of SCHARHROT skill, plus 20k because of this guy's skill if you trigger it before using the SCHARHROT, and it has its own like 8 to 12k base because it's going to be a grade 1 to a grade 3. And it always gets to restand, so you're going to have restanding 50k beaters for using no counterblast other than the one you use already for SCHARHROT skill. This is great, and this is one of the reasons why I think Hope on Dump at 1 is actually kind of fine, because even if you don't draw the Hope on Dump, now you can have this guy in the back row. Often your opponent will not snipe it. If you're afraid of them sniping it, just keep it in your hand forehead. So at some point they're going to run out of PGs. This is going to win you the game on its own. It's a great card. And he also has Ammon in the name, so worst case scenario, you can just use his skill on himself. It's kind of sad, but if you only have 2 of them, you can do that. Now, to go with the whole no counterblast play, I'm running 1 card that really helps this deck in terms of early game, and this is kind of the flaw of no counterblast Dark Irregulars, is that you become kind of weak to early rush, because usually your opponent is afraid of rushing you super hard when you're the Dark Irregular player, because they know in the back of their mind that if you give them too many counterblast, they're gonna clap back insanely hard, they're gonna use Hope on Dump or their first grade 3 turn, and all the tempo you've gained from rushing them is gonna be lost, and you're gonna be at 5 damage again. Once your opponent kind of catches on that you're not running any of the counterblast to Soul Charge cards, they're gonna feel a lot more open to rushing you, which is why we run 1. All the cards with the extra shield, 2. 4 copies of the Heal Guardian, 3. One of the Draw Sentinels. And the other thing we run to increase our defensive capabilities is 4 copies of Werewolf Keltzer. Werewolf Keltzer is an amazing card, even regardless of that, because it's a mini Dimension Creeper. How it works is that if he's in your soul, you can bind him, Soul Charge 2. So he basically counts as 2 soul. Once he's in soul, he's amazing. And the other really cool thing about him is that when you guard with him, at the end of the battle, you get to send him to soul. So just guarding with him is basically plus 2 soul. And now we're almost done with the lineup, but I want to bring your attention to something here. A lot of the cards we use actually require some bodies. Fujinlin, that basically lets you cycle a card from hand. We have Covetous Succubus, that cycles a card from hand. We have Number of Terror, that cycles a rearguard into cards from hand. And we have Ammon, that requires you to basically sacrifice some rearguards to get a drive check. And all of these cards are really, really cool, but wouldn't it be even more awesome if you could make all of these cycle skills or break-even skills into pluses? That's a thing I never really considered. I thought at first that it's kind of a lost cause. You know, I'm just going to be playing with the hand I have. Worst case scenario, I'll add draw triggers. And the last card that I was running initially was, at 3 copies, Demonted Executioner. Demonted Executioner is a Dark Irregulars card that says that when he's placed on rearguard, you get to counterblast 1, Soul Charge 3. If you Soul Charge a trigger, you draw a card. So it was kind of funny. You could draw a card, maybe. The Soul Charge was good for setting up all your soul condition, building up towards Hope on Dump. But a friend of mine looked through my binder of random Dark Irregular cards, including some rares, and he found this guy, Dopel Vampire. So this guy's skill is that when he attacks, you get to Soul Charge 1, and until the end of the battle, your opponent cannot intercept. Note, it's really cool because it says when he attacks, not when he attacks a Vanguard, so you can swing at rearguards for this, and they can't intercept with their other rearguards, so you can get rid of their annoying rearguards. Also, Luard right now has intercept if they run Decron, so it's kind of cool because you can go around the Decron. But the most important part about this guy is not the fact that he is a free Soul Charger that contributes to the no CB clause. He also has a CB skill. I'm sorry, I kind of lied. There is one card that counterblasts in this deck, and it's this guy, but it works really, really well. So, like, look. When he's in soul, counterblast 1, return this card to hand. The initial thought was, oh, hey, if I have this in soul, I can bounce it back, call it with Covetous Succubus, not commit too many cards, you know, and I can do the swing, refund the counterblast I used to bounce him back to hand, swing with him, get the soul charge, and once I trigger my Covetous skill next, I can just send him back to soul and keep doing the loop. Which sounds cool, you know, you get an extra rearguard, you get an extra attack, but think about it. On paper, you'll always have a bunch of counter charge in this deck because of this card. And technically, you don't really need to call this card. You can just keep him in hand. Fujinlin. For the low cost of Counterblast 1, which is a resource this deck does not use, can become a +1. Just Counterblast 1, bounce back the Dopel Vampire, activate Fujinlin, send back the Dopel Vampire, draw a card you might actually need instead of a 5k shield brick. It also works with Covetous Succubus in the same sense, because you can not only call him, you can just keep him in hand, and for her filter skill of draw 2, choose a card from hand, send to soul, you can choose this guy, send him to soul, and you just send a brick back to soul. So for Counterblast 1, this actually becomes a +2. In the same sense, Ammon, whose most annoying part of his skill is that you actually need to minus a card in field and a card in hand, just use Dopel. Just Counterblast 1, bounce Dopel back to hand, use Ammon's skill, choose a rearguard, send it to soul, choose a card from drop, send it to soul, choose Dopel, send it back. You only minused 1 instead of minusing 2. Then, Counterblast 1, bounce this guy back, and you can swing. And we can afford to do it in this deck because we have an amazing countercharger, and nothing else uses Counterblast except SCHARHROT. Because of the ability to bounce this card to become bodies for Ammon's skill, Number of Terror skill, same thing For Covetous, it can be a dead card in hand or field you can use to soul charge with a scale, and its ability to be comboed with Fujinlin to turn a counterblast into a +1 for every copy of Fujinlin you have. I run 3 copies of Dopal Vampire. This is kind of what makes the no counterblast Dark Irregulars build viable and not just a meme. Every counterblast I get, I can now use to clap back by using this thing to turn any net 0 in my deck into an actual form of advantage, and it's also just a really fun rearguard that can soul charge, that can deny interceptors, which surprisingly comes up in this meta. I will never stop singing the praises of Dopal Vampire and no counterblast Dark Irregulars in V Premium. This was my V Premium deck profile for Ammon SCHARHROT. I really enjoy playing this deck. V has so many problems right now. The format is awful, but I'm having so much fun because I get to play this. This is the most Dark Irregulars feeling deck I've played in so long. I've had so many problems with SCHARHROT before, and they were all like poofed away once I found this build. It just works like a well-oiled machine. Feel free to make any adjustments you want, and I want to see you try it out. Like, honestly, if I see more people playing this build and no CB Dark Irregulars in general, I'm just going to be so happy. I really want people to give this a shot. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to leave them in the comments. If you really like this video, well, leave me a like. You can even subscribe. I'm going to be making more Vanguard stuff. I might talk about the build I ran in Premium. It's also a flavor of no CB Dark Irregulars, but for Premium, because I really don't like good players denying me plays because they know how Dark Irregulars work. And also, you can follow me on Twitter, and also I stream on Twitch on occasion, so you can come say hi, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Have a great day. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.